Okay. Well, I wanted to follow up on your sort of second focus point of evolutionary psychology. And I'm really happy you touched on this, and it's an area of interest for me, except I didn't come expecting you to make that point, so I wasn't better prepared. But when it comes to evolutionary selection, there's a lot of different pressures going on and a lot of different things, different reasons a trait can be selected for. So, one of these obvious is that even though a trait may be let's say, wrong or detrimental in many situations. In the situations where it fits, it is so incredibly necessary that is just strongly selected for. A sort of classic example of this is humans assuming intelligence in things that are otherwise non-intelligent, and we see this throughout various cultures with anthropomorphizing animals or objects or other things. But if you're an ancient primate and you hear a strange noise in the night, you can either look up and see if something is there, or you can just completely ignore it and go back to sleep. And there's type 1 and type 2 errors where if there is in fact a predator there and you ignore it, then you're dead. Your genes stop. And if there is not a predator and you do look up, well, you've lost a little sleep, you've expended a little energy. But the cost of that is weighted so heavily in favor of assuming something is there and taking the chance to look up that you are happy to be wrong 9 times out of 10. You are happy to wrong probably 99 times out of 10. How many of us would not look if we heard a loud bang to assume like, oh, is there something dangerous around? I wouldn't. I certainly wouldn't go about my day and just completely ignore it. But there's a strong pressure to preserve this trait of thinking something is there even when it's not, even though most of the time it is inaccurate. Because few times that it is inaccurate or is accurate, it is crucial. There's also somewhat detrimental sexual selection traits. So a pretty obvious example of this is like vibrant displays by many male birds, like peacocks, as an example. And these clearly we could assume that, oh, they're doing this thing, and peacocks, they live, they thrive. There's tons of colorful birds out in the world, so clearly this must offer them an advantage in escaping predators. Well, no, it serves actually a distinct disadvantage in escaping predators. It doesn't help them survive through or survive to reproduce at all. It does, however, help them compete against their own species for mates. And so the trait is selected for, even though it is detrimental to their survival. So it is a beneficial trait, but it's not a beneficial in the trait in the way we might assume. So there might be something beneficial about assuming supernatural forces are going on, but it might not necessarily be because it is true. You had mentioned how sometimes atheists could be viewed as being untrustworthy. Perhaps religious belief helps people to coalesce and around an idea and more strongly work together as a group at the expense of those outside of the group. And so therefore, for people who hold that belief, it is beneficial. And for people who do not hold that belief, if they are not the majority group, or even if they're a equal size group, it may not be beneficial. And so therefore it may be selected for, even though it's not necessarily representative of a true experience.
Yeah, okay, so there's a lot there. I was going to make a dumb joke earlier about the caveman with the noise in the dark. About every horror movie I've seen, whenever they go to investigate the weird noise, they usually end up dying, but that's neither here nor there. But the point is taken. I made that comparison in the with the grass analogy. That's pretty well known. So yes, I agree. I don't disagree with anything you're saying. And evolutionary psychology is notoriously a complicated field. And this I wanted to be as brief as I could with the presentation with all the information. So yes, it is true that it is more complicated than just beneficial. It's more on a scale. It's not just a solely beneficial belief or solely not. In terms of the peacock, like you're right that it does inhibit, it does make them easier for prey to kill. Sorry, for predators to kill. However, I would say it's a net benefit because it does have the sexual benefit in terms of reproduction. So if peacocks, if it didn't serve a benefit in terms of sexual reproduction and it also inhibited them from escaping predators, then they would probably go extinct and wouldn't be selected for. So even though they are taken out by predators, there is a net benefit because the ability to reproduce, I guess they reproduce faster than they are killed by predators in that sense. So you have a net advantage. So you're right that you could look at it, and some mutations, actually most of them are neutral, so they don't serve a purpose. And again, as you're right, it most of that has to do with reproduction. So, for example, the reason most people get sick when they're older, like with arthritis and stuff, is because our bodies haven't really developed immune systems when we get older because we can't reproduce, and so there's no evolutionary benefit to having people survive longer in old age when they can't reproduce. Whereas if we died at early ages before we could reproduce, and we wouldn't last as a species. So certainly that's right. In terms of the high negative, I think the high like false positive rate, or what you were implying with the with the HAD, the hyper agency detection device. I think that's true, but again, this comes back to the epistemology of I think we need a defeater, and I think that our brains have the ability to we've evolved the ability to recognize when that is. So it is true that back in the day that we would not be able to tell the difference, but I think now we know. Like people still, and I do this, we still yell at technology or computers or phones when they're not working, as if it's a person whose fault it is, right? And I think that's a remnant of that, but we snap out of it. We don't build entire religions and cults around this idea of yelling at phones and thinking there's actually people in that. So religious belief seems to be this outlier that still sticks with us and that still incorporates such a large part of our society that hasn't been corrected. And so I will grant you that there can be a false positive rate and stuff like that, but I'm also granting that as we evolve, our brains will correct that so that we can recognize when, in fact, there is such a false positive. We can be like, oh, okay, I was wrong there. And so that's kind of with the, the Earth being going in a rotation that such like that. So, and if we don't take that mindset, then I think we would have to be agnostic in terms of how much of science is based on inference in terms of pattern seeking, in terms of what it looks like to me that if I do this experiment 500 times and I get the same result, my brain links those as a causal connection. If I do this, then I get this result. But like theoretically, this could just be a pattern that my brain's creating for survival will not be true. But I think it's more likely than not that it is in fact true, because if such a pattern existed, it'd be good for me to know it and live in my environment. So does that make sense in terms of I'm granting that you can have a high negative rate, but I'm also granting that our brains, we should be able to recognize when such a rate has
Yes,
occurred.
and I would agree with you broadly. Uh, I would like to ask, do you think that supernatural concepts in general, not focusing on a specific religion, but in general, have also evolved, co-evolved with humans? And by evolved, I mean sort of in a mimetic sense, and not memes as in, cat videos on the internet, but
Yeah,
memes as in
right.
ideas that reproduce travel between agents, and essentially the ones that are less successful. So the ones that are perhaps more obviously wrong, so let's say Santa Claus, disappear, or they persist in some other means where they're clearly false. But the ones that persist are the ones that are less obviously flawed or less obviously uh, incorrect, but not necessarily. They've just survived. They haven't been more incorrect from the start. They're just. I'm sort of losing my point there. I wish I could speak better.
Wait, what's that about Santa Claus? What
So
he's not
he's talking about
he's not real?
just to clarify, yeah, I know, right? Who knew? Just to clarify for people who don't know, when he's talking about memetics and memes, we're not talking about the internet term meme. Meme is an idea of like culture evolution, the idea that we have ideas, whether this is music, basically anything in culture, music, ideas, storytelling, mythology, all of this falls into this, where we have ideas that are spread. Some ideas are popular, some ideas fall out of favor. It's why we have trends. It's why TikTok is a thing right now, because a lot of people see this, they like it, they want to share it, they spread this around, and we as populations and as cultures decide what we like and what we don't. So stuff falls out of favor. There's a reason why people don't still, go to discos and wear afros as much as they used to in the 70s. It's fallen out of favor. It's not popular anymore. So you don't have this natural biological selection. You have this cultural idea. So I think Scott is asking is, do you think that religion and other supernatural beliefs like Santa Claus are like this, where the ones that are less obvious fall out of favor? And I would say probably. I don't know if I would say that cultural memetics is as analogous to true or false. I think it's just based on what's popular. I think it's a lot more indirectly related to survival. So I think we could believe in something that's. I don't think most of it affects our survival either way, is what I'm saying. So I think most memetics is neutral beliefs that don't really help or hurt us. And so I don't know how correlated that would be to survival. But in general, I would say that particular religions, yes, are a form of memetics, and that I guess the ones that would be more harmful or more obviously wrong would be selected out. But I don't know how confident I would be on that. So I think that's a good thought, though. I
Yeah.
would generally saying yes.
Thank you for listening. If you found this helpful, please like and subscribe. Please also look at the show notes in order to find a link to our group so that you can join our next discussion. I look forward to chatting with you.